I was standing in my Denver apartment bathroom applying the final touches of mascara for Christmas dinner with my family when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. The family photo that popped up on my screen made my blood freeze. There was my mother, Linda father Robert, my golden child brother Jake, and his wife Sarah, all dressed in matching burgundy sweaters, beaming at the camera in our childhood living room. The caption underneath read in cheerful red letters, "Getting ready for Christmas dinner with only the most beloved people." My name was nowhere to be found, and neither was I. My hands trembled as I stared at that photo, reading the caption over and over again. Only the most beloved people. The words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I had spent the entire morning getting ready, choosing the perfect emerald green dress that brought out my eyes, the one my grandmother always said made me look radiant. Now I felt foolish standing there in my empty apartment dressed for a celebration where I apparently wasn't welcome. I immediately dialed my mother's number, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She picked up on the third ring with her usual sing-song voice. "Amy, sweetie, are you on your way? We're all here waiting." "Mom, I just saw your Facebook post." My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. The one with the family photo and that caption about beloved people. There was a pause. Then Linda's tone shifted to that dismissive one I knew so well. "Oh, honey, don't be so sensitive. It's just a cute little caption. You know how social media works. I didn't mean anything by it. You took a family photo without me and said it was only the most beloved people. How am I supposed to interpret that?" "Amy, you're being dramatic again. This is exactly why Jake says you're exhausting to be around. Can't you just come over and enjoy Christmas like a normal person?" Those words hit me like a physical blow. Jake says I'm exhausting. How long had they been talking about me behind my back? How long had I been the family burden, the unwanted addition to their perfect little unit? I hung up without another word, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. But then something clicked in my mind, a cold clarity that cut through the emotional fog. If I was so unwanted, so unbeloved, then maybe it was time they experienced Christmas without my contributions. I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found Premier Holiday Catering, the upscale Denver company I had secretly hired to handle today's feast. For the past 3 years, I had been the invisible force behind every family gathering, quietly arranging and paying for elaborate spreads that my parents took credit for hosting. This Christmas was supposed to be the crown jewel: honey-glazed ham, truffle mashed potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon, cranberry orange stuffing, green bean casserole with crispy shallots, fresh dinner rolls, and a selection of gourmet desserts, including my grandmother's favorite pumpkin cheesecake recipe. The total cost was $3,200 money I had saved for months by skipping lunches and avoiding my usual coffee shop visits. I had wanted to surprise them to see their faces light up when they realized someone had taken care of everything. Now I realized how naive that had been. At Premier Holiday Catering, this is Marcus speaking. "Hi, this is Amy Patterson. I have a Christmas dinner order scheduled for delivery at 2 o'clock today to the address on Maple Street." "Yes, Ms. Patterson. Our team is actually loading the truck right now. Everything looks beautiful and we should be there right on schedule." I took a deep breath, feeling something hard and resolute settle in my chest. I need to cancel that order. Cancel. But ma'am, the food is already prepared and we're literally about to leave for delivery. Our cancellation policy states that orders canceled less than 24 hours in advance are non-refundable, and frankly, at this point, we can't really cancel. I understand the policy and I'm willing to forfeit the payment. I need you to not deliver that food. Something has come up and the dinner is no longer happening. There was a confused pause. Are you absolutely certain this is a significant order and the recipients will likely be expecting they can eat their beloved people sentiment for dinner? I said, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. Please confirm the cancellation. After I hung up, I sat on my couch in my beautiful dress staring at the photo again. That's when the memories started flooding back, all the little signs I had been ignoring for years. How Jake always got the better Christmas gifts, while mine seemed like afterthoughts. How my parents would light up when he entered a room but barely acknowledge my presence. How every family announcement or celebration somehow became about Jake's achievements, while my accomplishments were glossed over with polite but distant praise. But it was more than that. Over the past 3 years, since I had gotten my promotion to regional sales manager at the medical device company, I had become what I now realized was the family's secret financial backbone. When my parents mentioned struggling with their mortgage after Dad's early retirement, I quietly started sending them $500 a month. When Jake's restaurant hit rough patches, I helped cover his commercial rent payments. When they needed a new roof, I wrote a check for $8,000 and told them it was from my bonus. I had been buying their love, subsidizing their lifestyle, enabling their comfort, all while being treated like an outsider looking in. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I was beloved enough to fund their dreams, but not beloved enough to be included in their photos. My phone started buzzing with calls and text messages, first from my mother, then my father, then Jake. By the time I checked 20 minutes later, I had 31 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic messages. Mom, Amy, the caterers, never showed up. What happened? Dad, where is the food? Your mother is having a panic attack. Jake, did you do something with the catering? Sarah is freaking out. Mom, call me right now. This is not funny. Dad, Amy, whatever game you're playing, stop it. We have guests coming. The messages continued, each one more desperate than the last. I realized they had no backup plan, no grocery store run to salvage Christmas dinner. They had been completely dependent on the magical appearance of food, never questioning how it happened, never appreciating the effort and sacrifice behind it. Finally, my mother called again. This time I answered. Amy, thank God. There's been some terrible mistake with the catering company. They never delivered the food, and we have Uncle Tom driving up from Colorado Springs, and the Hendersons are coming over, and... There's no mistake, Mom. What do you mean? I stood up, walked to my mirror, and looked at myself in my emerald dress. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, like a lock clicking open after years of being sealed shut. Only beloved people get my money. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, my mother's voice came back, but it was different now, sharp, with an edge I rarely heard directed at me. What did you just say? You heard me, Mom. Only beloved people get my money. Since I'm apparently not one of the beloved people, I canceled the catering I paid for. You paid for the catering? What are you talking about? The disbelief in her voice was almost comical. Did she really think elaborate Christmas feasts just materialized out of thin air year after year? Had she never wondered how their modest retirement income stretched to cover such extravagant celebrations? I've paid for every family gathering for the past 3 years, Mom. Every birthday party, every Easter dinner, every Thanksgiving spread. I arranged it all, paid for it all, and let you take credit for being the generous hostess. Amy, you're being ridiculous. Even if that were true, family helps family. That's what we do. Family includes family in photos, Mom. Family doesn't caption pictures with only the most beloved people when one of their children is missing. Linda's voice exploded through the phone speaker. You are being absolutely dramatic. It was just a caption, just words, and now you're ruining Christmas over nothing. I hung up and turned off my phone. The apartment felt strangely peaceful without the constant buzzing of notifications. I changed out of my dress into comfortable jeans and a sweater, then made myself a simple sandwich. As I ate lunch alone in my quiet kitchen, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so calm on a holiday. But I needed to retrieve some personal items I had stored at my parents' house over the years. Photo albums, some of my grandmother's jewelry, a few books from college. If this was going to be a clean break, I wanted to collect everything that mattered to me. The 40-minute drive to my childhood home in Lakewood gave me time to think. The suburb looked exactly the same as it had when I was growing up, tree-lined streets with modest two-story houses and well-maintained front yards. Christmas decorations twinkled from every porch, and I could see warm lights spilling from windows where families were gathering for their holiday celebrations. I parked across the street from my parents' house and sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage. The house looked festive with its white lights and wreaths, but I noticed Uncle Tom's silver Subaru in the driveway, along with a car I didn't recognize. My stomach clenched as I realized they had indeed invited people over, expecting the magical catering to appear and save the day. I walked up to the front door and used my key to enter quietly. Immediately, I could hear voices coming from the living room, and something about the tone made me pause in the entryway. They were talking about me, but not in the panicked way I expected. Instead, the conversation had an oddly conspiratorial quality that made my skin prickle with unease. "The Amy problem is getting worse," Jake's voice carried clearly from the living room. "She's becoming more clingy and demanding. Did you see how she reacted to a simple Facebook post?" "I warned you this would happen eventually," Sarah chimed in, her voice carrying that smugly superior tone I had always disliked. "She's always been needy, but now she's getting territorial about family events." My father's deeper voice joined the discussion. "Your mother thinks we should just tough it out through New Year's, let her fund the holiday parties, then gradually distance ourselves." "That could work," Sarah continued, and I could hear the calculating tone in her voice. "We could milk her generosity through the holiday season, maybe even get her to help with Jake's restaurant expansion, then start going low contact. Tell her we're too busy with work and family obligations." Jake laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "The funny thing is, she actually thinks she's part of this family, like really part of it, not just the ATM with emotions. She's exhausting." My mother added, her voice carrying none of the warmth she had used with me on the phone. "Everything has to be about her feelings, her needs, her drama. Jake never caused us this kind of stress growing up." "Because Jake actually accomplished something with his life," my father said. "Amy's just drifting through that medical sales job, no husband, no kids, no real purpose except throwing money at people hoping they'll love her." My hands were trembling as I pulled out my phone and started recording. The conversation continued for several more minutes, each word feeling like another nail in the coffin of any hope I had harbored for genuine family reconciliation. They discussed specific strategies for extracting more financial support from me while minimizing actual contact. Sarah suggested they could play up fake family emergencies to get larger lump sums. Jake mentioned that his restaurant really did need expansion capital, and I was the obvious source. The most devastating part was how normal they all sounded, how casual and matter-of-fact their cruelty was. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment anger or frustration. This was a calculated plan discussed with the same tone they might use to plan a vacation or discuss the weather. Finally, I stopped recording and walked into the living room. All four of them were seated around the coffee table with papers spread out in front of them, and they froze like deer in headlights when they saw me standing in the doorway. "Amy," my mother gasped, her face going pale. "We didn't hear you come in." "Obviously," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "Otherwise you might have been more careful about your conversation volume." Jake tried to recover, first plastering on his charming smile. "We were just talking about family stuff, nothing important. Have you figured out the catering situation? Sarah's parents are driving down from Boulder and—" "I heard every word," I interrupted, holding up my phone. "Including your concerns about the Amy problem and your strategies for milking my generosity while cutting me out of the family." The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Tom, who had been sitting quietly in the corner armchair, cleared his throat. "Well," he said slowly, "this is certainly illuminating. Amy, I think you and I need to have a private conversation." Sarah jumped up from the couch, her face flushed. "This is a misunderstanding. We were just frustrated about the catering situation and—" "You were planning to use fake emergencies to extract money from me," I said, consulting my phone. "Sarah specifically suggested that approach about 6 minutes ago." "Amy, sweetie," My mother tried reaching toward me with trembling hands. You know we love you. We're just stressed about Christmas and... Do not call me sweetie, I said firmly. Do not pretend this was about Christmas stress. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? The exclusion, the emotional manipulation, the financial exploitation. Uncle Tom stood up from his chair, and I noticed he looked older than when I had last seen him at my grandmother's funeral 2 years ago. His gray hair was thinner, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone nursing arthritic joints. Amy, before this goes any further, I need to tell you something important, something your parents have been keeping from you. My father's face went ashen. Tom, this isn't the time. Actually, Robert, I think this is exactly the time. Uncle Tom's voice carried an authority I remembered from childhood when he would settle disputes between me and Jake with quiet firmness. Amy, I've been trying to reach you for months about your grandmother's will. The words hit me like ice water. Grandmother's will? But that was settled 2 years ago when she passed. You said she left everything to charity. Uncle Tom's expression darkened as he looked at my parents. That's what they told you, yes, but it wasn't true. He pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase, which I hadn't noticed sitting beside his chair. Your grandmother left specific instructions that everything was to go to you. The lake house in Grand Lake, her savings, her investment accounts, everything. The total estate is worth approximately $340,000. The room felt like it was spinning around me. My grandmother had owned a lake house. She had savings and investments. None of this made sense with what I had been told after her death. That's impossible, I whispered. Mom said Grandma died with almost nothing, just enough to cover her funeral expenses. Your parents have been intercepting legal correspondence for nearly 2 years. Uncle Tom continued, his voice growing stern. They forged your signature on documents declining the inheritance and had the estate transferred to a holding account while they contested the will. Jake jumped up from the couch, his face red with anger. That money should have been split between all the grandchildren. It's not fair that Amy gets everything just because she was Grandma's favorite. Jake, my mother hissed, but it was too late. So you knew, I said slowly, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in my mind. You all knew about the inheritance, and you've been stealing it from me for 2 years. My father finally spoke, but his usual authoritative tone was replaced by something defensive and weak. Amy, you have to understand, your grandmother was getting senile toward the end. She wasn't thinking clearly when she made that will. We were protecting the family's interests. Protecting your interests, you mean? I turned to Uncle Tom. How much of my inheritance have they already stolen? Uncle Tom consulted a document from his envelope. They've been using forged power of attorney documents to access approximately $47,000 so far. Monthly withdrawals of $2,000 supposedly for estate management and legal fees. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that I felt strangely disconnected from my own emotions. It was as if I was watching this happen to someone else, observing from a distance as my family's deception unraveled in real time. There's more, Uncle Tom said gently. I ran a credit check when I couldn't reach you through normal channels. Amy, are you aware that there are several loans and credit cards in your name that you didn't apply for? My blood turned to ice. What kind of loans? A business line of credit for $60,000, 2 credit cards with a combined limit of $15,000, and a car loan for $28,000, all opened in the past 18 months. I looked directly at Jake, who had gone pale. You stole my identity. It's not stealing, Sarah protested shrilly. Your family helps each other, and you make good money, so it's not like it hurts you. The restaurant expansion. I said, understanding flooding through me. The new equipment, the renovation. You funded it all with loans in my name. Jake couldn't meet my eyes. I was going to pay it back. The restaurant is doing better now, and I just needed some startup capital. $103,000, Uncle Tom said quietly. That's how much debt they've created in your name, Amy, plus the stolen inheritance funds. My mother started crying, but they were angry tears, not remorseful ones. Amy, you don't understand the pressure we've been under. Your father's retirement isn't enough and Jake's business needed help, and we thought you'd want to help family. Help family by lying to me, by stealing from me, by planning to cut me out of your lives as soon as you'd extracted enough money. The photo. I continued understanding dawning. The Facebook post. That wasn't just thoughtless cruelty, that was deliberate, wasn't it? You were trying to make me angry enough to cut contact myself so you could claim I had abandoned the family. Sarah's guilty expression confirmed my suspicion before she even spoke. The inheritance lawyer said that if you voluntarily estranged yourself from the family, they might be able to contest the will more effectively. I turned to Uncle Tom. What are my legal options? Identity theft is a federal crime, he said solemnly. I have contacts at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit who specialize in family fraud cases. The forged inheritance documents constitute mail fraud and wire fraud. We're looking at potential federal charges for everyone involved. My father's face crumpled. Amy, please, we're your parents. Don't destroy your family over money. You destroyed this family, I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I've been sending you $500 a month for 3 years to help with your mortgage. I've covered Jake's restaurant rent payments 8 times when he claimed he was struggling. I paid for your roof repair, Mom's dental work, Dad's prescription medications. I've given this family over $47,000 in direct support, and you repaid me by stealing my inheritance and my identity. Jake made one last desperate attempt. Amy, the restaurant really is profitable now. I can start paying back the loans. We can work this out as a family. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording app. I have everything you said earlier about the Amy problem and your plans to milk my generosity. I don't think family is the right word for what this relationship has been. Uncle Tom gathered his papers. Amy, I think we should continue this conversation somewhere else. I have all the legal documents in my car, and there are some other things about your grandmother's estate that you need to know. As we prepared to leave, my mother made one final plea. Amy, please, don't let anger make you do something you'll regret. We love you. We've always loved you. I stopped at the door and turned back to look at them one last time. Jake was slumped on the couch with his head in his hands. Sarah was crying angry tears. My parents stood together, but they looked smaller, somehow diminished by their exposed deception. No, I said quietly. You loved my money. You loved having a family member you could exploit without consequences. You never loved me. If you had loved me, I would have been in that photo. Uncle Tom and I sat in his Subaru in my parents' driveway while he explained the full scope of what had been hidden from me. The interior of his car smelled like coffee and old leather, comforting scents that reminded me of childhood visits when he would take me fishing at local ponds while my parents fussed over Jake's latest achievements. Your grandmother suspected something like this might happen, he said, pulling additional documents from his briefcase. She witnessed how your parents treated you compared to Jake, especially in the last few years of her life. That's why she made me the executor of her estate instead of your father. I studied the inheritance documents, seeing my grandmother's familiar, spidery handwriting in the margins, where she had made notations. Next to my name, she had written, "The only one who visited just because she loved me, not because she wanted something." She left me letters. Uncle Tom continued, specific instructions about how to handle your parents if they tried to interfere. She predicted they would attempt to contest the will or manipulate you into declining the inheritance. How did they intercept legal mail? Isn't that a federal offense? They had your mail forwarded to their address by claiming you had moved back home temporarily. When official estate correspondence arrived, they used forged documents to claim power of attorney for your affairs. It's a sophisticated scheme that required significant planning. The weight of premeditation made the betrayal even more crushing. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single bad decision. My parents had systematically planned to steal my inheritance while maintaining a facade of family unity. Uncle Tom handed me another folder. There's more you need to know about the identity theft. I hired a private investigator when I couldn't reach you, and we discovered the full extent of what Jake has been doing. The credit report inside made my stomach churn. In addition to the business loans and credit cards Uncle Tom had mentioned, there were smaller charges that painted a picture of casual, ongoing theft. Grocery stores, gas stations, online, purchases, restaurant bills. Jake had been living partially on credit cards opened in my name. The car loan is for a BMW, Uncle Tom said. Sarah has been driving it for 6 months. They've been stealing from me to fund their lifestyle while I've been eating ramen noodles to save money for their Christmas catering. I said, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. It gets worse, Uncle Tom said gently. The private investigator found evidence that they've been planning this for much longer than 2 years. There are email communications between your parents and Jake dating back to when your grandmother first got sick. He showed me printed emails that made my blood run cold. My mother discussing how to manage Amy's expectations about the inheritance. Jake researching how to obtain credit in someone else's name. My father consulting with a lawyer about contesting wills based on claims of mental incompetence. They knew Grandma was leaving everything to me. She told them directly, "Your grandmother was sharp until the very end, Amy. She made her intentions clear to everyone in the family. Your parents spent the last year of her life trying to convince her to change the will." I remembered those final months before my grandmother's death, how my parents had suddenly become very attentive to her needs. I had thought it was sweet that they were finally prioritizing time with her. Now I realized it had been a campaign to influence her final decisions. The day after her funeral, Uncle Tom continued, "Your father asked me if the will reading could be delayed. He claimed the family needed time to grieve. I should have been more suspicious." The timeline was becoming clearer. While I had been processing my grief and assuming estate matters were being handled by the adults, my parents had been implementing their theft plan. Every family gathering over the past 2 years had been an opportunity for them to enjoy the fruits of their deception while manipulating me into providing additional financial support. "Uncle Tom, I need to know something honestly. Did other family members know about this?" He shook his head firmly. "Your cousins, your aunts and uncles, none of them knew about the inheritance or the identity theft. Your parents told everyone that your grandmother had left everything to charity and that you had requested privacy during your grief." Another layer of manipulation. My extended family probably thought I had become distant and antisocial after Grandma's death, when in reality I had been excluded from gatherings I never knew about. "Your cousin Michelle asked about you at Thanksgiving," Uncle Tom said. "She wanted to invite you to her engagement party, but your mother told her you were too busy with work and weren't interested in family events anymore." Each revelation felt like another punch to the gut. How many relationships had been damaged by my parents' lies? How many opportunities for genuine connection had I lost because my family was systematically isolating me? My phone buzzed with another call from my mother, but I declined it immediately. Uncle Tom noticed the gesture. "Amy, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you want to pursue criminal charges for the identity theft and fraud?" The question hung in the air between us. I understood the magnitude of what he was asking. Pressing charges would mean police reports, investigations, possible jail time for my family members. It would make the break permanent and public. But as I sat there looking at the evidence of years of calculated theft and manipulation, I realized that the family I thought I was protecting no longer existed. Maybe it had never existed at all. What would happen to them, I asked. Identity theft involving amounts over $5,000 is a federal felony. Jake could face up to 15 years in prison, though first-time offenders usually get much lighter sentences. Your parents could face charges for conspiracy and mail fraud. Sarah could be charged as an accessory if she benefited from the stolen funds. I thought about Jake's restaurant employees, people who depended on their jobs and had no idea their workplace was built on fraud. I thought about my parents, both in their 60s, facing the possibility of spending their retirement years dealing with federal criminal charges. But then I thought about the Facebook photo, the caption about beloved people, the casual cruelty of their recorded conversation. I thought about 2 years of fake family gatherings where I had been performing love and connection for people who saw me as nothing more than a funding source. I want to report everything, I said finally. They made their choices. Now they have to face the consequences. Uncle Tom nodded solemnly. I'll call my contact at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. They'll want to interview you and collect all the evidence we've gathered. As he made the phone call, I stared at my parents' house through the car window. The Christmas lights that had looked so festive an hour earlier now seemed garish and fake. I wondered if any of the warmth I had felt in that house over the years had been genuine, or if it had all been performance art designed to keep me compliant and generous. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Sarah. Please don't destroy Jake's life over money. He made mistakes, but he loves you. I showed the message to Uncle Tom, who had just finished his phone call. They're trying to manage the damage now, he said. My FBI contact can be here within an hour to take your statement. Are you ready for this? I thought about my grandmother alone in her final years, while her family circled her like vultures. I thought about all the money I had sacrificed to support people who saw my generosity as weakness to exploit. I thought about the life I could have been living if I hadn't been financially supporting adults who were perfectly capable of taking care of themselves. I'm ready, I said. The FBI financial crimes specialist, Agent Jennifer Walsh, arrived at Uncle Tom's house in Colorado Springs 2 hours later. She was a compact woman in her 40s with short brown hair and eyes that missed nothing. We sat around Uncle Tom's kitchen table as she methodically reviewed every document, every email, every piece of evidence we had collected. This is one of the more sophisticated family fraud cases I've seen, Agent Walsh said as she photographed the forged inheritance documents. The coordination between multiple family members and the extended timeline suggests significant premeditation. She asked me to walk through every financial transaction I could remember, every family emergency I had funded, every time I had sent money to help with their various crises. As I recounted the pattern, I began to see how carefully orchestrated it had all been. The timing is particularly telling, Agent Walsh noted. Your parents would create a crisis, you would provide financial assistance. Then there would be a period of normal family interaction before the next emergency. It's a classic manipulation cycle. I showed her the recording I had made of their conversation about the Amy problem. She listened to the entire thing twice, taking notes about specific statements that could be used as evidence of conspiracy. The part where Sarah discusses creating fake emergencies to extract larger lump sums is particularly damaging, Agent Walsh said. Combined with the identity theft evidence, we have a strong case for federal charges. Over the next 3 hours, we built a comprehensive timeline of the fraud. Agent Walsh explained that the investigation would take several months, but she could freeze the fraudulent accounts immediately and begin the process of restoring my credit. What about Jake's restaurant? I asked. He has employees who depend on their jobs. That's not your responsibility, Agent Walsh said firmly. But typically in cases like this, if the business can be separated from the fraudulent financing employees aren't affected. It depends on how much of the restaurant's operations were funded with stolen money. As we finished the interview, Uncle Tom pulled out one final folder. Amy, there's something else about your grandmother's estate that you should know. Inside were photographs of the lake house in Grand Lake, and it was breathtaking. A rustic log home with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water, a wraparound deck, and a private dock. The interior photos showed cozy rooms with stone fireplaces and handmade furniture. Your grandmother bought this place in 1982 with money she inherited from her own mother, Uncle Tom explained. She always said it would go to the grandchild who appreciated natural beauty and quiet moments. I remembered my grandmother talking about a special place where she went to think and find peace, but I had never realized she was describing property she owned. My parents had led me to believe she lived solely off Social Security and a small pension. The house is fully paid off and has been maintained by a local property management company. Your grandmother's instructions were very specific. You should use it as a retreat, a place to remember who you are when the world becomes too complicated. Looking at the photos, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice. She had always been the one who encouraged my love of hiking and camping, who understood my need for solitude and reflection. While my parents pushed me towards social conformity and traditional markers of success, she had valued my independent spirit. There's a hidden benefit to owning property in Colorado, Agent Walsh added. Colorado has strong homestead exemption laws. If your family attempts to pursue civil litigation against you for reporting the fraud, they can't touch your primary residence. The strategic implications were becoming clear. By claiming my inheritance, I would have both financial security and legal protection. The lake house could become my sanctuary while I rebuilt my life free from family manipulation. Over the following weeks, Agent Walsh's investigation moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, and Jake's financial records showed a clear pattern of fraudulent activity. He had been using my identity to fund not just his restaurant expansion, but also gambling debts that Sarah knew nothing about. Your brother has a serious gambling addiction, Agent Walsh informed me during a follow-up meeting. Casino records show he's lost over $80,000 in the past year. The identity theft was partially motivated by his need to cover gambling debts. The revelation explained so much about Jake's erratic behavior over the past few years, his mood swings and financial stress that my parents had blamed on restaurant challenges. He hadn't been struggling with legitimate business expenses. He'd been feeding an addiction with stolen credit. Meanwhile, I hired a top-tier attorney specializing in identity theft recovery. Within 30 days, all fraudulent accounts were closed, and the credit reporting agencies had flagged my file for monitoring. The process of recovering the stolen inheritance money began immediately. My parents made several attempts to contact me, but I had blocked their numbers and directed all communication through my attorney. Jake left a voicemail that my lawyer played for me 20 minutes of sobbing apologies, mixed with angry accusations that I was destroying the family over money. He's trying to manipulate you even now, my lawyer observed. Classic abuser behavior: apologize, then blame the victim for the consequences of their own actions. Sarah contacted me through a mutual acquaintance begging me to drop the charges against Jake. She claimed she hadn't known about the gambling addiction and promised they would pay back every penny if I would just give them time. But I had learned too much about the scope of their deception to believe any promises of reform. The private investigator had uncovered evidence that Sarah had been fully aware of at least some of the identity theft. She had been making purchases with the credit cards opened in my name and had signed documents as a witness for several fraudulent transactions. 6 weeks after that devastating Christmas Day, Jake was arrested at his restaurant during the lunch rush. The local newspaper ran a story about a popular downtown eatery being connected to federal fraud charges. Sarah lost her job at a marketing firm when her employer learned about her involvement in the identity theft scheme. My parents' house went into foreclosure within 60 days when they could no longer afford the mortgage payments without my monthly assistance. They were forced to move into a cramped apartment in a senior living complex. But something unexpected happened as their world crumbled. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of revenge accomplished. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for what could have been if they had chosen honesty and genuine love over manipulation and greed. The most painful part was reading character reference letters that Uncle Tom showed me, letters my parents had written to the court, trying to minimize Jake's charges. Even facing federal prosecution, they continued to portray me as the villain, the vindictive daughter who had destroyed her family over money. They still didn't understand that it had never been about money. It had been about love, respect, and basic human decency. Money was just the tool they had used to demonstrate how little they valued me as a person. Agent Walsh called to update me on the case progression. Your brother has agreed to a plea deal. He'll serve 18 months in federal prison and pay full restitution. Your parents are cooperating with the investigation and will likely receive probation and community service. What about the restaurant employees? I asked. That's actually something I wanted to discuss with you. The restaurant building and equipment were purchased legitimately before the fraud began. If someone were to pay off the fraudulent business loans, the restaurant could continue operating under new management. I understood what she was suggesting. I could use my inheritance money to save the jobs of innocent employees while ensuring Jake couldn't profit from his crimes. The employees would keep their jobs, but Jake would be banned from any involvement in the business operations. Agent Walsh continued. It would be a way to minimize the collateral damage while still holding the perpetrators accountable. I realized this was an opportunity to break the cycle of cruelty and manipulation that had defined my family relationships. Instead of seeking maximum punishment, I could choose a path that protected innocent people while still maintaining firm boundaries with those who had betrayed me. Let me think about it, I said, but I like the idea of turning something destructive into something constructive. As winter turned to spring, I drove up to Grand Lake to see my inheritance property for the first time. The lake house was everything the photos had promised, and more. Sitting on the deck overlooking the water surrounded by pine trees and mountain silence, I felt my grandmother's presence in a way that brought tears to my eyes. This was her gift to me, not just financial security, but a reminder that peace was possible, that I deserved beauty and tranquility and space to heal from the damage that had been done to my sense of self-worth. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely free from the emotional and financial obligations that had defined my relationship with my nuclear family. The silence was intimidating at first, but gradually it became liberating. I started making plans. 3 months after that devastating Christmas, I received a call that changed everything I thought I knew about my extended family relationships. My cousin, Michelle, Jake's age, but worlds apart in character, called me directly after getting my new phone number from Uncle Tom. "Amy, I need to tell you something that's been eating at me alive," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "We've all been lied to about you for years." She went on to explain that at the family's Easter gathering, which I obviously hadn't been invited to, Uncle Tom had revealed the truth about my parents' fraud and manipulation. The reaction from my aunts, uncles, and cousins had been shock outrage and immediate concern for me. "Your mom told us you'd become antisocial after Grandma died," Michelle continued. "She said you'd requested space from family gatherings and didn't want to be contacted. We respected what we thought were your wishes, but we all wondered why you'd changed so much." Over the next hour, Michelle painted a picture of systematic isolation that was even more extensive than I had realized. My parents had been intercepting not just legal mail, but invitations to birthday parties, graduation celebrations, and family reunions. They had told everyone I was too busy with work to attend, too grief-stricken to socialize, too focused on my career to maintain family relationships. "Aunt Susan asked specifically about inviting you to her 60th birthday party last year," Michelle said. "Your mom said you'd told her you weren't interested in big family productions anymore. We all thought you'd become kind of selfish and career-obsessed." The manipulation had been breathtakingly thorough. While I had been feeling isolated and wondering why my extended family seemed distant, they had been told I was the one choosing distance. My parents had managed to damage my relationships across the entire family network while positioning themselves as the reasonable, concerned relatives trying to manage my antisocial behavior. "There's something else," Michelle said. "Grandma's friends from her church have been trying to contact you for 2 years. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door to Grandma, has some things that belonged to her that were specifically meant for you." Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a treasure trove of information about my grandmother's final years. When I visited her small apartment near the church, she welcomed me with tears in her eyes and a box of items my grandmother had asked her to save for me. Inside were handwritten letters my grandmother had written, but never sent, photo albums I had never seen, and jewelry that had belonged to her mother. but most importantly, there were detailed notes about her interactions with my parents during her illness. Your grandmother was sharp as a tack until the day she died. Mrs. Patterson told me over tea and homemade cookies. But your parents kept telling the doctors she was getting confused and forgetful. They tried to convince her physician that she needed cognitive testing. The letters revealed my grandmother's growing awareness that my parents were trying to undermine her mental capacity in preparation for contesting her will. She had documented their visits, their questions about her finances, and their attempts to convince her that leaving everything to one grandchild would be unfair to the family. She told me she was worried about you, Mrs. Patterson continued. She said you were the only family member who visited her just to spend time together, not to ask for anything or hint about inheritance. She knew your parents were planning something, but she didn't realize how extensive their scheme would be. Reading my grandmother's private thoughts about my parents' behavior was both validating and heartbreaking. She had seen through their manipulation but had been unable to protect me from it beyond the provisions in her will. Mrs. Patterson introduced me to several other church friends who had known my grandmother well. Each of them shared stories about her pride in my achievements and her concerns about how my parents treated me compared to Jake. She used to say you got your kindness from her side of the family, said Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been my grandmother's bridge partner for 15 years. But she worried that your parents were taking advantage of your generous nature. The community support was overwhelming and healing in ways I hadn't expected. These women, most of them in their 70s and 80s, immediately adopted me into their circle. They invited me to church dinners, shared family recipes, and provided the kind of unconditional acceptance I had been seeking from my biological family. Meanwhile, the legal consequences for my family were unfolding exactly as Agent Walsh had predicted. Jake was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution. His gambling addiction was documented in court records, which helped explain the scope of his financial crimes. Sarah filed for divorce while Jake was serving his sentence. She claimed in court documents that she had been unaware of the extent of his gambling problem and identity theft, though the evidence suggested otherwise. She moved back to Boulder to live with her parents and took a job as a substitute teacher. My parents received probation and community service, but the social consequences in their retirement community were severe. Word spread quickly about the federal charges, and they found themselves ostracized by neighbors and former friends. They were forced to move to a different town where their reputation hadn't preceded them. The most satisfying development came when the local newspaper, which had covered Jake's arrest, followed up with a human interest story about the restaurant employees who kept their jobs despite their employers' legal troubles. I had quietly arranged to pay off the fraudulent business loans and transfer ownership to the restaurant's head chef, a hard-working single mother named Diana, who had been with the business since it opened. Diana had no idea I was behind the anonymous purchase until I visited the restaurant 6 months later. When I introduced myself, she broke down in tears. "You saved our jobs," she said. 23 people were going to lose their income right before Christmas, and you saved us. Why would you do that for strangers? Because you weren't responsible for Jake's crimes, I replied. And because turning something destructive into something constructive felt better than just seeking revenge. The restaurant was thriving under Diana's management. She had eliminated the expensive menu items that Jake had used to inflate prices and focused on quality comfort food that attracted loyal neighborhood customers. The employees, who now had a stake in the business success, worked harder and provided better service than they ever had under Jake's chaotic leadership. My extended family relationships were healing as well. Michelle invited me to her engagement party where I met cousins I hadn't seen in years and learned about all the family events I had missed due to my parents' manipulation. Everyone was warm and welcoming, apologetic about believing the lies they had been told about my antisocial behavior. Uncle Tom became a regular presence in my life again. We started taking monthly fishing trips to Grand Lake, just like when I was a child. He helped me understand family dynamics I had been too young to recognize patterns of favoritism and manipulation that went back generations. Your grandmother broke the cycle by leaving everything to you, he explained during one of our trips. She recognized that sometimes love means making difficult choices to protect someone from family dysfunction. The lake house had become my sanctuary for healing and reflection. I spent weekends there writing in journals, hiking mountain trails, and slowly rebuilding my sense of self-worth. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what would please others or meet their expectations. I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. She helped me understand how my parents had conditioned me to equate my worth with my financial contributions and how breaking that pattern would require conscious effort over time. "You're grieving the family you thought you had," she explained. "That's a legitimate loss that deserves time and attention to process." The grief was real and complex. I mourned not just the relationships I had lost, but the years I had wasted trying to earn love that was never available. I mourned the financial sacrifices that had delayed my own goals and dreams. I mourned the naive trust that had made me vulnerable to such extensive manipulation. But gradually, the grief was replaced by something I had never experienced before: authentic peace. Without the constant drama of family emergencies and financial requests, my life became remarkably calm. I could save money for my own goals, make plans without considering others' needs, and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial utility. The most unexpected development was meeting David Chen, a volunteer at a nonprofit organization where I had started donating my time. David was a social worker who specialized in helping families recover from financial fraud, and he understood my experience in ways that felt deeply validating. "Family financial abuse is more common than people realize," he told me after we had been dating for several months. "But most victims don't have the resources or support to hold their abusers accountable the way you did." David had grown up with his own family dysfunction parents who had favored his siblings and treated him as the responsible one who would always be available to solve problems. He understood the complex emotions involved in setting boundaries with family members who had raised you to prioritize their needs over your own. "The hardest part isn't cutting contact," he said. "It's learning to trust your own judgment about who deserves access to your time and energy." One year after that devastating Christmas, I received a letter from my mother. It was the first direct communication I had received from either parent since blocking their phone numbers. The letter was 3 pages of handwritten emotional manipulation, alternating between self-pity and blame. She wrote about how difficult their lives had become since I destroyed the family. She mentioned my father's depression and health problems, their financial struggles, and their isolation from former friends. She claimed they had made mistakes, but insisted their actions had been motivated by love and concern for the family's welfare. The letter concluded with a plea for reconciliation. "We love you and miss you. Families should forgive each other. Your grandmother wouldn't want you to hold grudges." I showed the letter to my therapist, who helped me recognize the continued manipulation tactics. "She's trying to use your grandmother's memory to guilt you into resuming contact, and she's framing their consequences as your responsibility rather than the result of their choices." I never responded to the letter. Instead, I donated an equivalent amount of money to the nonprofit where David and I volunteered an organization that helped other families recover from financial fraud. It felt like a better use of my emotional energy than engaging with people who still couldn't acknowledge the full scope of their actions. As the second anniversary of my grandmother's death approached, I planned a memorial service at the lake house. I invited Uncle Tom, my cousins, my grandmother's church friends, and David. We shared stories about her life, her wisdom, and her love for family members who appreciated her for who she was rather than what she could provide. Standing on the dock where my grandmother had spent countless hours watching sunsets, I felt her presence in a way that brought tears of gratitude rather than grief. She had given me more than financial security. She had given me permission to value myself and expect others to do the same. The memorial service became an annual tradition, bringing together the people who had become my chosen family. We would gather each year to remember not just my grandmother, but the importance of authentic love and the courage required to break cycles of dysfunction. 2.5 years after that devastating Christmas day, I stood in the kitchen of my lake house preparing dinner for 12 people. David was outside grilling salmon while Uncle Tom supervised from a deck chair with a beer in his hand. My cousin Michelle and her husband were setting up tables on the deck, and Mrs. Patterson was arranging wildflowers in mason jars with the focused attention she brought to all aesthetic endeavors. The scene felt surreal compared to where I had been on that Christmas morning when I discovered the family photo that changed everything. Back then, I had been a 32-year-old woman desperately trying to purchase love and acceptance from people who saw me as an ATM with emotions. Now I was surrounded by people who loved me for who I was not, what I could provide. Diana arrived with her teenage daughter Emma, both carrying homemade desserts from the restaurant. Diana's business had expanded to include catering services, and she insisted on contributing to every gathering at the lake house, despite my protests that she was a guest, not a vendor. "You gave me a chance to build something real," Diana always said. "Let me share the results with people who matter to you." David's parents drove up from Denver, bringing his sister and her 2 children. The kids immediately gravitated toward the lake, and soon we had impromptu swimming lessons happening off the dock. David's family had welcomed me with the kind of easy warmth I had always imagined real families provided. As I watched everyone interacting, I marveled at how different this felt from the tense performance-based gatherings of my childhood. Nobody was keeping score of who contributed what or monitoring the emotional temperature for signs of drama. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter happened spontaneously, and people helped with tasks because they wanted to, not because they feared judgment for not helping enough. Uncle Tom cornered me in the kitchen as I was preparing the salad. "Amy, I have something to tell you that I've been putting off." My stomach clenched, automatically a conditioned response to serious family conversations. "What is it?" "Your parents contacted me last month. They're asking if I think there's any chance of reconciliation." I set down my knife and looked at him directly. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that reconciliation requires acknowledgement of harm done and genuine changes in behavior. I asked if they were prepared to take full responsibility for their actions and make amends without expecting anything in return. And they said they had already apologized and that holding grudges was unhealthy for family relationships. They wanted to know if you might be willing to start with small steps, maybe a phone call or coffee meeting." I resumed chopping vegetables while I considered my response. Over the past 2 years, I had worked extensively with my therapist on the question of potential reconciliation. We had explored different scenarios and my feelings about them in depth. "I don't think they understand what they did wrong," I said finally. "They're treating it like a simple family disagreement instead of systematic financial fraud and emotional manipulation." "That's what I concluded as well," Uncle Tom said. "But I wanted you to know they reached out in case you wanted to consider it." The conversation was interrupted by David calling everyone to dinner. As we gathered around the tables on the deck, I looked at the faces surrounding me and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. These were my people, my chosen family, the ones who had stayed when things got complicated and celebrated my healing without expecting anything in return. Mrs. Patterson asked me to say grace, something that had become a tradition at our lake house gatherings. I stood and looked out over the water where my grandmother had spent so many peaceful hours. "We're grateful for the food we're about to share, for the company we keep, and for the wisdom to recognize authentic love when we find it. We remember those who taught us that family is built through choice and commitment, not just biology. And we're thankful for second chances to build the relationships we always deserved." Over dinner, David's nephew asked me about the lake house and how long it had been in our family. I told him the story of my grandmother's gift, though I simplified the details for young ears. "She sounds like a really smart lady," the 8-year-old concluded after hearing about her decision to leave the house to someone who would appreciate its peace and beauty. "She was," I agreed. "She taught me that love isn't something you have to earn through perfect behavior or financial contributions. Real love is freely given to people who deserve it simply by being themselves. After dinner, David and I walked down to the dock while the others cleaned up despite our protests. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the lake in shades of gold and pink that never failed to take my breath away. "I have something to ask you," David said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. My heart stopped for a moment, then started beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. We'd been talking about marriage for months, but the proposal still felt magical and surprising. "Amy, you've taught me what it means to choose family based on love and respect rather than obligation and tradition. You've shown me that it's possible to break cycles of dysfunction and build something healthier. Will you marry me and let me be part of your chosen family for the rest of our lives?" Through tears of joy, I said yes. The ring was perfect, a simple solitaire that caught the last light of sunset and reflected it back in brilliant sparkles. As David slipped it onto my finger, I heard applause from the deck, where our entire gathering was watching and cheering. Later that evening, after our guests had gone home and David and I were sitting by the fireplace, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The path from that devastating Christmas morning to this peaceful summer evening had been painful, but ultimately liberating. I had learned that family loyalty shouldn't require accepting abuse, that generosity without boundaries becomes enabling, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from relationships that diminish your worth. The financial recovery had taken time but was eventually complete. Jake had paid full restitution from his prison earnings, and my credit had been restored to excellent status. The inheritance money had allowed me to buy my apartment outright, fund my nonprofit work, and build a substantial emergency fund. For the first time in my adult life, my financial security didn't depend on anyone else's approval or behavior. More importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment about people and relationships. The red flags I had ignored or rationalized with my birth family were now impossible to miss. I could spot manipulation tactics, emotional blackmail, and conditional love from miles away. 6 months later, David and I were married at the lake house with our chosen family in attendance. Uncle Tom walked me down the aisle and Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears while taking pictures. Diana catered the reception and Michelle served as my maid of honor. The wedding was everything my relationship with David represented: authentic, joyful, and built on a foundation of mutual respect. We wrote our own vows, promising to choose each other daily and to build a family based on love rather than obligation. My parents weren't invited, though. We received a card from my mother with a passive-aggressive note about how hurt they were to be excluded from such an important day. I read it once, then filed it with my other legal documents as a reminder of why boundaries were necessary. Jake was still in prison during the wedding, but Sarah sent a gift with a note claiming she was happy for my new start. I donated the gift to charity and added Sarah to my mental list of people who still didn't understand the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. The most meaningful moment of the wedding came during our reception when Uncle Tom stood up to make a toast. Amy's grandmother always said that the best revenge against people who try to diminish you is living a life so full of joy that their negativity becomes irrelevant. Today, surrounded by people who love Amy for exactly who she is, I think we can say mission accomplished. As I looked around at the faces of people who had become my real family, I knew Uncle Tom was right. This was the life my grandmother had wanted for me, the one she had made possible through her final gift. Not just the financial inheritance, but the reminder that I deserved love without conditions, support without strings attached, and relationships built on genuine affection rather than utility. David and I honeymooned in Scotland, visiting castles and hiking through landscapes that reminded me of the mountains around Grand Lake. We talked about our future plans, maybe children someday, definitely continued work with families recovering from financial abuse, possibly expanding the lake house to accommodate larger gatherings of our chosen family. When we returned home, I found a letter waiting from a woman named Jennifer, whose family was dealing with identity theft perpetrated by her sister. She had read about my case in a newspaper article about family financial fraud and was asking for advice about legal options and emotional recovery. I spent the evening crafting a detailed response, sharing resources and encouragement based on my own experience. Over the following months, Jennifer and I corresponded regularly as she navigated the process of holding her sister accountable while protecting herself from further manipulation. That correspondence led to speaking engagements at conferences about family financial abuse, which led to consulting work with nonprofit organizations, which eventually led to my decision to leave medical sales and focus full-time on advocacy work. The career change felt like another piece of claiming my authentic life. Instead of selling products to earn commission and fund other people's dreams, I was helping families heal from trauma and rebuild their financial security. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful in ways my previous career had never been. 3 years after our wedding, David and I welcomed our daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, named after my grandmother. Holding her in the lake house where my grandmother had found peace, I made silent promises about the kind of family environment I would create for this precious child. Sarah would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, that her worth wasn't tied to her achievements or contributions, and that family should be a source of safety rather than stress. She would learn about boundaries, authentic relationships, and the difference between love and manipulation. Most importantly, she would know that family is both a gift and a choice, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to walk away from relationships that diminish rather than enhance your life. Now, as I rock my daughter to sleep while watching sunset paint the lake in impossible colors, I often think about that devastating Christmas morning that started this journey. At the time, discovering that Facebook post felt like the end of my world. I couldn't have imagined it was actually the beginning of my real life. The pain was necessary to break through the illusion of family love I had been sustaining through financial generosity and emotional accommodation. The betrayal was devastating, but ultimately liberating. The loss of relationships I thought mattered cleared space for connections that actually did. My grandmother's wisdom echoes through every peaceful moment at this lake house. Real family chooses to love you exactly as you are, not as who they need you to be. She gave me more than money and property. She gave me permission to expect authentic love and the resources to walk away when I didn't find it. Sometimes people ask if I regret reporting my family's crimes or if I miss having those relationships in my life. The answer is always the same. You can't miss something you never actually had. The family I thought I lost was built on manipulation and exploitation. The family I found is built on genuine love and mutual respect. That's not just a happy ending, it's a completely new beginning. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most, but breaking free can lead to relationships that truly nourish our souls. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve authentic love. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember you are worth more than what you can provide for others. May you find the courage to choose relationships that celebrate who you are, not what you can do for them.